I'm sorry, I heard my husband was brought in." As I ran into the treatment room, the eyes of the doctors, nurses, and my husband were all on me. I wondered at the momentary silence, but when my eyes met my husband's, I was assured that he was safe and that his life was not in danger for the time being. But the next moment was outrageous. My name is Tanya. I'm a 30-year-old nurse. My husband, Steve, is 2 years older than me and a government employee. Unlike my previous boyfriends, I was attracted to him because of his seriousness. I don't know if it's because of my profession as a nurse or my nature, but I don't have a hard time serving others, and I am happy when people depend on me. Hence, helping out my boyfriend, lending him money, and such things were a daily occurrence. Even though I knew in my head that I shouldn't do it, I would do it when I was asked to. Many of my fellow nurses are like that, and relationships are always a topic of our conversations. But then, a turning point came for me. I met my husband at a blind date with fellow nurses. He seemed quiet and serious. He was the type of guy I had never been around before, and I was attracted to him from the start. Other girls said he looked too serious or plain, and there were no rivals. We exchanged contact information after a strong push from me. I was also the one who asked him to go out with me. The relationship lasted 3 years. It's been a smooth relationship, with no conflict or betrayals. Many relationships break up after a few months, and it would have been better if the relationship had lasted a year, but with Steve it had lasted 3 years. I said to him, "Well, things are going to continue to go well. Shall we get married?" He proposed to me, and we got married. My husband had little dating experience, and his hobbies were reading and playing games at home. He was someone who rarely went out, but he was a bookworm and never ran out of topics to talk about. He is not a fan of the outdoors, but he seems to have a lot of gaming buddies, and we often play games while talking online. He says that since he started dating me, he has had more opportunities to go out. He was interested in it just because he didn't have anyone to go to, and he enjoys it wherever we go. My in-laws are a bit far away, about a 2-hour drive. I have the impression that my in-laws are gentle people. But Steve is the youngest of 3 siblings, and his in-laws are quite elderly, so we don't get to see them often. After meeting them at the wedding and the wedding ceremony, we only went to greet them once, at New Year's. We exchanged mid-year and year-end gifts, and I do call them, but I work nights, so our hours don't match, and I don't get a chance to talk to them very often. My husband and I go out somewhere when our days off coincide, and we do our share of the household chores. I thought we were doing well. However, it was about 3 months ago that I sensed something was wrong with my husband. When I came home after work, he was asleep on the sofa. A beer can was lying on the table. "You'll catch a cold," I said to him. He looked at me sleepily, rubbing his eyes. "Isn't it unusual for you to be sleeping here and drinking beer?" I asked. "I was at an online drinking party with my gaming buddies. I was having too much fun and drank too much. I don't understand this world, but as long as my husband was having fun, I thought it was fine. But this was a mistake." After that, similar incidents continued, and one day when I saw my husband, I noticed that his hair had changed. "What's wrong with your hair?" He had never dyed his hair before, but now it was all done up and brown. "Is this hair okay at your job?" My husband is a government employee, and I thought he told me that the regulations are very strict. "What was wrong with it? I just thought recently that I should enjoy dressing up while I'm young. What do you think? Does it look good on me?" My husband was not a sophisticated man for his age, but he had suddenly changed, hadn't he? I'm not sure if it looks good on him or not, maybe because I'm not used to seeing it. But it doesn't look good on him. I didn't say it looked good on him. "Oh, I see," I simply replied. A few days later, he got his ears pierced. Again, I didn't think this looked good on him. Was he having a midlife crisis? I thought about that, but maybe he's having trouble with his job or something. "Hey, what's going on with you lately?" Unable to remain silent, I asked him straightforwardly, but he didn't give me a clear answer. "Nothing." And then my husband went to the bedroom. I knew I could not go on like this, but there was no one to fill in for the nurse who had retired not long ago, and I was so busy that I could no longer afford to pay attention to my husband. Around the time this was going on, Steve said, "My dad's not feeling well lately, so I'm going home for the weekend to check on him for a while." My father-in-law is old, and my husband must be worried about him. I nodded my head in agreement, and my husband began to leave the house every weekend. I tried to be considerate in my own way by cooking for him and texting him during work hours, but he rarely responded. Just when I thought it was time to have a proper discussion with him, I received an unbelievable call while I was at work. "Tanya, the police are trying to contact you." A colleague of mine called and passed the phone to me. "The police? Why?" I picked up the phone, feeling uneasy. He told me that Steve had been in an accident and had to be taken to the emergency room. What about my husband? Is he okay?" I was so upset that I questioned the police officer on the phone. He told me that he had heard it was not life-threatening and that he had been taken to our hospital where I worked. I rushed to the emergency ward. I asked the ward nurse where to find him and hurried to the treatment room. When I opened the door, I was met with the stares of the people there. "Excuse me, I heard my husband was brought in." The doctor looked doubtful, and the nurse's eyes swam. I felt uncomfortable, but when my eyes met my husband's, I was relieved. The nurse explained briefly. They said he had a leg injury that was so severe that they were going to cut his pants in order to treat him. When I looked at my husband again, his pants had already been cut off. Then my husband, noticing my gaze, shouted, "Tanya, don't look at me!" What? I'm a nurse, and I wonder if my husband thinks it's embarrassing for me to see him have his pants cut off? Certainly that may be the case, but it's common sense to cut off clothing when you can't remove it normally due to injury. "Just get out of here!" my husband shouted. I stood there, not understanding what was going on. Even though my husband screamed, the hands of the doctors and nurses did not stop rushing to treat him. It was only natural. If I listened to every word they said, it might take too much time and stall the procedure. Suddenly, something extraordinary grabs my attention. "What is that?" I muttered to myself. On the inside of my husband's thigh was a tattoo. The injury being treated was on his left leg, while the tattoo was on his right leg. Fortunately, the right leg did not appear to be damaged, and the eye was drawn to the leg that had been injured. Scrawled onto the inside of my husband's thigh is someone's name. It seems to be a woman's name. "Yasmin? Who?" My husband continued to be shocked by my words, but I got out of there once the procedure continued. I talked to a fellow nurse in the emergency ward who told me that apparently my husband had not been brought in alone. She said she thought it was a couple who was married or dating because he was brought in with a woman his own age who had been in the accident with him. When he checked the name of the woman who was transported with him, her first name is Yasmin. It matches the name on the tattoo. Does this mean they were having an affair? I kept asking myself. My coworker said she had brown hair and pierced ears and also had a tattoo with his name on it. It didn't add up. I asked the nurse who treated the woman, and she told me that my husband's name was also tattooed on her inner thigh. I think it's safe to say they are having an affair. But what kind of a nerve does a woman have to have the name of her cheating partner tattooed on her body? I can only think that she must be unstable. As I was thinking this, I remembered the call from the police. The police first called my mother and father-in-law's house, but my in-laws cannot drive, so they asked where I worked and called me. This means that my in-laws must be worried. So I called their house, and my father-in-law answered, "Is Steve gonna be all right?" He was worried, so I told him that Steve had been in an accident and had been taken to the hospital, but was not in life-threatening condition. My father-in-law's voice told me he was clearly relieved. So I asked him, "By the way, Dad, have you been feeling better?" My father-in-law said he had no idea what I was talking about. I clarified, "Because Steve said you were not feeling well and he's been gone every weekend. He said he was taking care of you." I had no idea. It was all a lie. I was relieved to hear that my father-in-law was in good health and that there was nothing wrong with him during his recent medical checkup, but the problem was, where was my husband going? If it wasn't to my in-laws' house, then it must have been to the place where he was having the affair. But I had no proof. After finishing my working hours, I went home without seeing my husband, who was admitted overnight for treatment. I went home and began to go through my husband's belongings, thoroughly examining them. The evidence was easy to find. I found photos of him with this woman, hotel receipts, and even an email confirmation for reservations to a romantic resort. According to the schedule, they must have had this accident on the way home from the resort. The accident was a car crash on a mountain road. No one else was injured, and neither Steve nor this Yasmin woman appeared to be in life-threatening condition. However, since Steve had injured his leg, and it might be difficult for him to walk properly for a while, normally I should be worried about him as a wife, but I don't have that feeling anymore. I couldn't believe he lied about visiting his parents, saying he was worried about them, much less was lying to cover up an affair with another woman. I wondered if Steve's recent strange behavior, such as dyeing his hair and getting his ears pierced, was due to the influence of this woman. I told a fellow nurse and asked her to refer me to a lawyer who was good at divorce matters. The next day, I headed to the hospital room with my husband's belongings. My husband seemed to have hit his head and was so confused that he could not remember what had happened in the treatment room yesterday. Honestly, I didn't even care about the truth anymore. I left the hospital room without even having a conversation with him because I had a shift to get to. When I finished work, I went to see my lawyer and told him what happened. He told me that with that much evidence, I would have enough to sue. I just wanted to get a divorce as soon as possible. I couldn't have that man come out of the hospital and live in the same space. I felt so betrayed by my husband that my anger outweighed my sadness. From there, I found a new place to live and moved out on my own. Only my husband's belongings remain in the house. I planned to be patient until the day my husband was discharged from the hospital. I thought about divorcing him while he was in the hospital, but he is in the hospital where I work, so it would be troublesome if something happened to him there. Then, we could get a divorce when he gets out of the hospital. I drove to pick my husband up from the hospital. I have to make a quick stop. Please come with me. He looked at me strangely, but nodded. I headed for a family restaurant near our house. When I entered the restaurant with my husband, the lawyer was waiting for us. My husband looked at me as if he didn't understand what was going on, but I guess he was tired of standing on a leg that was not fully healed yet. He sat down quietly, and I thrust the divorce papers at him. "Divorce? Why?" my husband shouted in a crazy voice. I seethed in my anger silently for a moment. "What do you mean, why? You had an affair. You even had your accident on your romantic trip. The evidence of your affair was found in our own home. What do you think you're doing? Besides, you lied about your father not feeling well. You lied about going to your parents' house to see this woman." My husband's face turned pale. "You think I am naive? Yasmin, the woman you were having an affair with, is out of the hospital. I heard that her injuries were less severe than yours. I can't believe she was brought to the hospital where I work." I smiled wryly, and my husband's face turned even paler. "You will pay for the anguish you've caused me." I handed him the divorce papers and a pen. My husband did not take the pen. "Is it only your leg that's injured, or have you lost the use of your hand as well?" I sarcastically said to him, and he finally picked up the pen. But he wouldn't sign. He only stared at the paper. "Why don't you sign it? Are you scared at the idea of starting over? You think this was just some game?" My husband froze, as if I had hit the nail on the head. I gave him a cold stare. "You're kidding, right? I can't be with my husband with the cheater's name tattooed right on his body." He looked at me in surprise. What? What are you talking about?" He may have been trying to deceive me, but I was unmoved. "You really don't remember? I was there when you were rushed to the emergency room. You were yelling at me not to look." Then my husband's face changed color. "Sound familiar? I saw the tattoo on the inside of your thigh, too. But what kind of a man tattoos his mistress's name on his body? Even if we didn't get divorced, do you think you can hide it from me?" My husband was slack-jawed. "No, it's not. That's not it," he said. I could only sigh at the sight of my husband. Dyed hair, pierced ears, and tattoos, and with the name of the person you cheated on your wife with? At least do it after you get divorced. While Steve was in the hospital, I actually met Yasmin face to face. I didn't go out of my way to see her or anything. We just bumped into one another. She was lost in the hospital, looking for the gift shop, and she asked me for directions. The gift shop is just around the corner. Oh, and you're Yasmin, right? My husband is Steve, I said, as she checked my nameplate, turned pale, and left at a speed that was hard to believe for an injured person. Please don't run in the hospital, I called after her. I think she was more embarrassed than I was. She probably heard from Steve that I worked here, but she probably never thought she would run into me at such a big hospital. Quite the stroke of luck. Seeing how my husband said he would rather start over with me than with someone he was supposedly loved enough to get a tattoo, I asked my Steve if he had been dumped by Yasmin. Steve didn't think I would ever find out, and apparently would rather suffer and stay married to me rather than have me file for alimony. I can't believe he thought he wouldn't get caught with her name tattooed on his body, and breaking up with him wouldn't erase the fact that he cheated on her, though. Nurses have a high rate of attracting the wrong kind of men. I'd been the same way, but when I married Steve, I thought he was a serious man and that he wouldn't betray me. And then he was stupid enough to get a tattoo of the person he cheated on me with, which is the worst thing ever. I'm so blind. I'll leave the rest to the attorneys, and I hope I never see him again. The lawyer looked at me and nodded. I've moved out, so you'll have to get a cab or whatever to get home on your own. Bye. My husband looked at me with a pitiful face, his mouth agape. He would probably be crippled until his leg wound healed, but he deserved it. After that, I was divorced without incident. I also got alimony. Thanks to that, Steve was left broke and bankrupt. To his surprise, he found out that Yasmin was married to a colleague from his office, and they had actually found out by chance that he and her husband were online game buddies. Of course, Yasmin's husband filed a claim for alimony against her as well. I heard that Steve had to quit his job, and the rumors just keep on spreading. But I got the alimony paid, and I don't care if Steve quits his job or not. After the divorce was finalized, my former in-laws contacted me, but they were furious when I politely explained the situation. They apologized to me and said they would never let Steve hurt me again. This time, the word spread among my fellow nurses, but they all laughed it off, and I am still laughing my way through it. Now, I live alone, and I'm free to do whatever I want.
Mom wants us to come home for the New Year holiday.
My husband suddenly told me during our first holiday season as a married couple. I told him I wanted to visit my own family too, but he flatly refused. To make things worse, his mother started berating me, saying I lacked awareness as a wife and calling me a shoddy daughter-in-law. No matter how much I tried to negotiate, my husband always sided with his mother. I had had enough. I couldn't play this family game anymore. I decided to take measures that would permanently sever ties with my in-laws. My name is Abby, and I'm 28 years old. I married Malcolm, my boyfriend of 2 years. Our newlywed life was going smoothly. Both of us work full-time, so neither of us bear the burden of household chores alone. Being a woman, I didn't want all the housework pushed onto me, so I made sure my husband did his share. My job and personal life were fulfilling. I even started thinking about having a child once things settled down a bit. 1 month after we got married, I was suddenly summoned to my in-laws' home. Summoned might not be the right word, though. At that time, I simply thought I was invited to visit their home. I had visited my in-laws before we got married, but I was too nervous to engage in any meaningful conversation. I thought that this could be a good opportunity to bond with my mother-in-law. With such a light feeling, I headed to my mother-in-law's house. However, the reason for the summoning was nothing short of outrageous. After arriving at the family's house, we are led into the living room. As soon as my husband and I sat down on the sofa in their living room, my mother-in-law's voice rang out.
Excuse me, Abby. Why are you sitting there so leisurely? Please make me some tea.
I'm sorry. Caught off guard, I apologized. I was under the impression that I would be treated as a guest at my in-laws' home. I wasn't expecting anything lavish, but I certainly didn't expect to be treated like a servant.
Abby, you're taking too long to steep the tea. Hey, it's common sense to warm up the cup first.
My mother-in-law was watching me prepare the tea, constantly sighing. My father-in-law and husband said nothing. I thought if she had so many complaints, why didn't she just make the tea herself? I admit my tea-making skills were lacking, but I was also annoyed by her imposing her own standards on me. Then, on another day, I was about to clean our house when my mother-in-law suddenly called me. I hurried over to my in-laws' house with my husband, only to find my mother-in-law already angry.
Why didn't you bring any gifts? Isn't it common to bring a gift when visiting your in-laws?
She reprimanded me without preamble. I didn't have any plans to go out today, and I only decided to come here at the last minute, so...
I'm not asking for excuses. These days, daughters-in-law quickly show disrespect to their mothers-in-law, don't they? I really got stuck with a shoddy daughter-in-law.
I'm sorry. In the midst of all this, neither my husband nor my father-in-law offered me any support. I didn't necessarily want them to defend me. I just wanted someone to stop my mother-in-law's unreasonable tirade. After my mother-in-law's lecture, I whispered to my husband, "Hey, Malcolm, can you say something to your mom? It was a last-minute decision to come today, so there was no way I could have prepared a gift." But my husband just sighed, in an annoyed manner.
Don't you think you should always have some gifts ready, just in case you have to visit? I agree with my mom on this.
The response I got from my husband were irrational words blaming me. Is he kidding me? Why is he taking my mother-in-law's side, too? Not only has my impression of my husband decreased, but within a few days, I've developed an aversion towards my mother-in-law. After that, I was regularly called in and had the ways of the in-laws imposed on me. When you visit your in-laws, the daughter-in-law takes care of all the chores. The daughter-in-law prioritizes her husband and parents-in-law. The New Year's vacation is always spent at the in-laws' house and so on. Honestly, isn't their thinking way too outdated? Even I had grown fearful of visiting my husband's family. On our first New Year's holiday after marriage, my husband told me,
"We're expected to return for the New Year's holiday."
"What? Hold on. When will I be able to visit my family?"
It might be tough this time. We can decide again after the New Year.
What's with that? We promised to visit both families equally, didn't we? I was infuriated by my husband's irresponsibility. He responded with an air of annoyance.
It can't be helped now, right? No point in bringing that up.
Why would he sigh at a time like this? We had clearly agreed on this before we got married. That's right. Both my husband and I were the type to want to visit our families regularly. That's why we rented an apartment halfway between both our parents' homes and decided to visit them equally. But when we opened the lid, we had already visited the in-laws 6 times, and I had only been able to return to my family once. According to my husband, this time we were to stay at his parents' house from the end of work until work resumes. There's no way I can accept such an absurd proposal, I demanded of my husband. At least before work starts again, I want to visit my family. When my husband told me to
ask Mom,
I called my mother-in-law. The first thing my mother-in-law said when she answered the phone was,
"Abby, you're in charge of the special New Year's dinner, okay?"
"I understand, but I will definitely visit my family before work starts, so please be prepared for that." When I clearly told her that, my mother-in-law raised her voice in surprise.
"What's with that? Prioritizing your own family? You like the consciousness of a daughter-in-law."
I was lectured for an hour over the phone and ended up completely exhausted. When I complained about it to my husband, he casually replied,
Mom just wants you to be a good wife, Abby. She often says, I want her to be a wife fit for our family.
His dull nature was also draining me. In the end, we ended up spending the entire New Year's holiday at my in-laws' place. It's your first New Year's since you got married, so prioritize them. That's what my mother said, so I reluctantly complied. During our stay at the in-laws, I worked like a maid. From preparing meals to cleaning the whole house, doing the laundry, taking out the trash. I ended up having to do everything by myself. If I asked my husband for help, I was scolded.
Abby, this is the wife's job, isn't it? Malcolm is tired from his usual work, so it's only natural that he should rest during the New Year's holiday, right? You're really inconsiderate.
I work full-time too, you know. Thanks to you, I haven't been able to rest at all during the New Year's holiday, you know? Though I retorted in my heart, I didn't want to make a fuss at the beginning of the new year. It's the first year of our marriage. I forced myself to accept it and somehow made it through the holiday at the in-laws' house. I hadn't seen my family since the start of the new year. My husband offhandedly told me,
I'm tired. I'll stay home.
So I ended up going to visit my family alone. That's probably when my trust in him began to wane. Of course, I had complaints about my mother-in-law and my husband's family too. But more than that, I was fed up with my husband, who wouldn't take me seriously when I tried to talk to him. Even after the new year, the harassment from my mother-in-law didn't stop. When I began refusing to visit her home, she started calling every day. When I woke up in the morning, there would already be about 10 missed calls. I thought something had happened, so I called back, only to have my mother-in-law yelling at me.
So you finally woke up. You lack a sense of responsibility as a wife. Get up at 5 a.m. every day and make a nutritious meal for Malcolm.
Even if I got home a little late from work, she would scold me terribly.
I heard from Malcolm. It's outrageous for a woman to stay late at work. A wife who doesn't come home before her husband is the worst. Prioritize your home, you heartless girl.
I actually earn more than your son. In fact, I contribute more to our living expenses. I almost pointed this out many times, but I somehow held it in and just brushed it off with a, yeah. Gradually, I stopped answering calls from my mother-in-law and deleted her voicemails without listening to them. This went on for about a year, and then the hellish season came around again. Sure enough, my husband was pestering me saying,
Mom says you should come home for the New Year's holiday.
This time, I firmly told my husband, I am not going this year. I can't bear it anymore. I'm not a housekeeper. My husband, annoyed by my words, grumbled at me.
Listen, Abby, don't upset my mom. You married me, so at least be considerate of my family.
Excuse me? You never even properly show your face to my family. Besides, I've been working really hard to build a good relationship with your mother.
That's why my mom is always mad, right? You need to try harder.
Try harder? As if I'm the only one to blame? Seething with rage, my husband dropped the final bomb.
Let me tell you something, Abby. Mom is mad because you're a failure. You get that?
At that moment, the dam I had barely been holding back finally burst. A failure? It's my fault? I've been putting his family first for his sake and putting up with it all this time? Taking a deep breath, I looked my husband in the eye. I'm cutting ties with your family. I'm never seeing your father and mother again. My husband looked surprised for a moment, but he must have realized that anything he said now would be futile. Surprisingly, he gave in quite easily.
All right, I get it. Totally fine. I'll go home alone for the holidays.
Our relationship got a bit strained after that. We talked less at home, but frankly, I didn't care. I was able to spend the New Year's holiday with my family for the first time in a while. That fact alone made me extremely happy. When I arrived at my parents' house, my mom asked worryingly, "Abby, is everything okay with Malcolm's family? I can't help but worry." "I'm fine, Mom. I made it clear to him that I won't be involved anymore." "Is that so? I hope everything's all right." My mom still looked a bit uneasy. She's worried in her own way about my relationship with my husband's family. After enjoying my childhood home after so long and leaving the housework to Mom, I was relaxing when suddenly the doorbell rang. "Coming!" I quickly headed for the door, only to find my husband standing there. What?" I was taken aback, not expecting this at all. He looked worn out. I invited him in, but he didn't say a word. Losing patience, I demanded an explanation. "What's up? Weren't you supposed to be going home to your folks today, Malcolm?" At that, my husband slowly opened his mouth.
Mom said to bring Abby.
"What? Again? How relentless can my mother-in-law be?" Though outraged, I held my ground. "Didn't I tell you I'm not going to your parents' house again? When I said I was cutting ties with them, you agreed, right, Malcolm?"
"Yeah, but Mom's angry. She says it's inconceivable for a daughter-in-law not to visit her in-laws."
"I don't care. I can't handle your mother's harassment anymore. And I'm fed up with your father's indifference too, so I don't intend to see them ever again." Upon hearing this, my husband pleaded.
"That's a problem. Like Mom said, Abby, you married into this family. Please consider my position."
"Your position? How ridiculous. What era are you living in?" I vented my anger at him. "Enough is enough. I didn't get married to become your parents' housekeeper. I don't want anything to do with in-laws who harass me and a husband who doesn't stand up for me." I had never spoken so strongly. My husband flinched. But it wasn't enough. Not compared to the humiliation I'd endured all this while. "If you continue to side with your mother, I'll divorce you."
Divorce? You're joking, right?
"I'm serious. Being mistreated just because I'm your wife? Living with a husband who won't help me and simply does what his mother says? I'll never be happy. I'd be far better off single." When he realized that I was seriously considering divorce, his face turned pale. Just then, his phone rang. Looking at the screen, he appeared startled. I knew right away it was his mother calling.
"Hello?"
My husband responded with a pitiful voice. I could hear his mother squawking loudly over the phone, even from where I was standing. Losing patience with my husband's wavering, I snatched the phone from him. Hello, mother-in-law, it's me. No matter how much you try to use my husband, I won't be coming over anymore."
"What? You're my daughter-in-law, aren't you? I won't accept that."
My mother-in-law fired back without missing a beat, but I retorted with twice the power. "Daughter-in-law? Daughter-in-law? Are you living in the Stone Age? It's the 21st century."
"What an insolent bride. You can at least show up at the house for special occasions."
"No way. My husband is free to go there, but whether it's a special occasion or not, I absolutely will not go. If you have anything more to say, I'll divorce Malcolm."
Divorce? Are you planning to disgrace Malcolm?"
"Then let's divorce once and remarry under my surname. That's fine, right?"
"That's ridiculous. I won't allow that."
"Do as you please. Regardless of what you say, I have no intention of dealing with you guys ever again. Goodbye." With that, I spat out and hung up the phone. I then turned to face my husband. That's the deal. Like I said before, if you take your mother's side, we'll get a divorce. If you can understand my point of view and treat me as an equal, I'll let this slide."
"I understand. I choose you, Abby."
My husband hung his head for a while, but ultimately made the decision to give our relationship another shot. Since then, I stopped visiting my in-laws, and the mother-in-law stopped contacting us as well. Perhaps reflecting on his past behavior, my husband now regularly visits my parents. Of course, my parents don't treat him like a workhorse. They adore him as if he were their own son. I'm sure we'll face many obstacles in the future. Even so, I want to team up with my husband who chose me and overcome each day together.